Thank you very much, Leanne, and a very warm welcome from me to everyone. This is the third event in a series of 4 that we're doing on the Latin American bond markets. And this is in support with the IFC, Green Bond Technical Assistance Program. We've done a first one that looked at the overall Latin American market. The second one was dedicated to Brazil, and today's event, as you know, is dedicated to Mexico. And by the way, you can watch the previous ones in a recording through our website, which will then lead you to YouTube as well. To start us off, because I don't know what your level of understanding is of both ICMA and also the sustainable bonds market, I thought I'd give you a quick introduction, which might also help the ones that are not that familiar with the sustainable bonds market yet to better follow the conversation in the panel. So at ICMA, we are of course fortunate enough to manage the secretariat for what is now known globally as the principles. We started talking about all the individual principles. We just call them the principles now, because as you can see, there are quite a few of them now. We of course started off with the green bond principles, then the social bond principles. Sustainability bonds, which we're going to talk about during the panel again, are a mix of green and social projects. And then the latest one is a kind of a different type of bond. The first ones are all so-called use of proceeds bonds. So the proceeds mention green projects or social projects, and sustainability-linked bonds are general corporate purpose bonds, as they're called, where the focus is more on an issuer's strategy. So all together are called the principles, and we talk about sustainable bonds when we talk about all of them. So this is really the development. The first ones that we had were the green bond principles in 2014. However, as you might know, we already had a green bond launched in 2007. The first one was by the EIB, and then a year later followed by the World Bank. But the principles really only came out in 2014, and they're not launched by ICMA. As I said, we are managing the secretariat. They are created and also amended and changed by a so-called market-led initiative, which consists of issuers, underwriters, and investors in sustainable bonds. We then in 2017 had the social bond principles and the sustainability bond guidelines. They're actually called guidelines. They're a mix again of green and social principles. Then the latest ones that came out last year in June were the sustainability linked bond principles. As I just said, they're for general corporate purpose bonds. And then we also have guidance for transition finance. So there is no transition bond principles, but we have guidance in form of the Climate Transition Finance Handbook. So as I said, the market-led initiative is also responsible for updating the principles. The latest version is indeed of this year. We've just updated that during our AGM in June. And what we've added to the 4 core components, we've added 2 key recommendations that were actually already widely applied in the market for an issuer to have a bond framework and also for an issuer to get an external review. I guess also in the wake of sustainability-linked bonds, we found that also with use of proceeds bonds, there's investors always also look at an issuer strategy. So we, in the principles, we recommend a heightened transparency for the issuer also on their strategies and commitments. The other thing that you've probably noticed in the market, there's a proliferation, you could say, of taxonomies. The most well-known one and also the leading one, of course, being the EU taxonomy, but other countries have also come up with taxonomies. So again, following market practice in the principles now, we're encouraging issuers, if in their framework they do mention the taxonomy, they should really highlight that in the framework as well. And also, they should really be transparent on any social and environmental risks. So for example, if you issue a green bond, there might also be some social risks associated with that, or vice versa. If you issue a social bond, you should probably highlight if there are any green risks or environmental risks that might come up with that. Then it also makes reference to guidance. So they're not just the principles that I've shown to you on the previous slide, but there's also a lot of handbooks and guidance out there that you can all find on the ICMA website under resources. And then lastly, it provides a diagram or a graphic rather that I'm going to show to you in one of the next slides as well. Yeah, so this is this diagram or graphic, which again shows you very nicely on the one hand what is there. So on the left-hand side, you see there are use of proceeds bonds, and on the right-hand side, there are general corporate purpose type bonds. And then at the bottom, you see that there's the Climate Transition Finance Handbook, and that actually indicates that this, as you see, this is thematic guidance, which can be used in conjunction with financial instrument guidance or principles. So you can actually use the Transition Finance Handbook recommendations in conjunction with either issuing a green bond, for example, or a sustainability-linked bond. This is an overview of, we've actually looked into this last year and come up with this chart. The green social bond principles, in fact, all the principles, they have by now really become a global de facto market standard. And as you can see in 2020, 97% of all sustainable bonds issued globally have been aligned to some sort of some type of principles. And this is just an evolution of the market. So the combined volume of sustainable bonds at this point is actually approaching $900 billion US. So we could actually reach 1 trillion by the end of the year. And that's really also representing more than 80% increase over the same period in 2020. So that just showcases the phenomenal growth and really the surge in these types of bonds. So we could say the market is on track record for another, record year. It seems like there are being records broken every year. And this seminar or this webinar is really there to look at, to have a closer look to Latin America and specifically to zone in, if you will, on Mexico. With that, I'm going to finish my presentation and I'm going to hand back to Leanne.
I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, Juan Govea from Banobras, to take the stage.
Good morning and good afternoon to all the attendees. Banobras appreciate the invitation for the ICMA virtual event, scaling up the sustainable bond market in Mexico. In the next 10 or 15 minutes, I will present the active participation of Banobras in the Mexican ESG bond market. So let's start with the presentation, please. Banobras has objective to attend to national entities with funding and technical assistance, infrastructure projects, and participation with the private sector. Both the mission and vision are related with the sustainable development and economic and gender gap reduction. In 2017, Banobras was appointed as the first development bank issuer of a sustainable bond in Latin America. Since then, Banobras has been a regular issuer of this kind of bonds in the local market. As mission, we have to contribute to the sustainable development of the country and the well-being of Mexicans through the promotion of investment in infrastructure, public services, and the financial and institutional strengthening of subnational entities. In the vision, we are recognized as an institution with a financial strength via reference in terms of inclusion, technical assistance, and access to financing for the generation of infrastructure and public services with a high social impact that contributes to the reduction of gaps and the development of Mexico. Another key points from the bank are the following. Banobras is the largest development bank in Mexico. And second, Banobras is the 5th bank in terms of credit portfolio in the Mexican banking system. Next, please. Our sustainable bank strategy begins with this. In July 2018, Banobras joined as a partner of the Green Bond Principles and the Social Bond Principles led by ICMA. In 2020, Banobras received the Green Alide Award for the Sustainable Funding Strategy. As 2021, Banobras is the largest issuer of sustainable bonds in Mexico. Since the first sustainable issuance in 2017, Banobras has issued 13 bonds in fixed and floating rate formats in Mexican pesos and inflation-linked bonds. The total amount rounds 43 billion pesos or more or less 2.1 million US dollars. Regarding the sustainable bank strategy, we have the objective to consolidate a sustainable financing chain with six strategic alignments. The first one is governance. The second, internal process and strategic alliances. Third, environmental and social risk management. Fourth, social welfare indicators. Fifth, sustainable projects promotion. And sixth, communications and transparency. For the current projects categories, we have the following. The first one is regarded to infrastructure, disaster recovery, sustainable transport, renewable energy, energy efficiency, water efficiency, and water and wastewater management, and finally, prevention and control of pollution. The most important of this portfolio in percentage are renewable energy with 45.5%, disaster recovery with 19%, and also public service infrastructure with almost 20%. The next, please. The milestones in Banobras. In terms of environmental, social, and gender policy, Banobras has achieved the following results. First, the Environmental and Social Management Unit, in Spanish is UGAS. This Environmental and Social Management Unit was created in May 2021, and this unit is made up by specialists in environmental and social management whose profiles complement Banobras' financial background. The second is the Green Climate Fund accreditation process with the GCF. The objective is to mitigate the climate change and to encourage gender and equality inside Banobras. We have shared information with the GCF to meet the requirements of the accreditation process and funding access. This access of funding must be between $50 million and $250 million. Next is the Environmental and Social Risk Management System, named as SARAS in Spanish. Banobras recently implemented an Environmental and Social Risk Management System. The SARAS methodology was aligned with local credit regulations and institution risk management framework. And finally, we have the gender policy that is aligned with the Paris Development Bank Statement on Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment, the Great Place to Work Award, issued by the Secretaría de Trabajo y Previsión Social, that is the Ministry of Labor, and finally, certificate by the Mexican Labor Standard Equality and Non-Discrimination. Next, please. The Banobras Sustainable Bonds is aligned with the ICMA Sustainable Bonds guidelines that are the Green Bond Principle plus the Social Bond Principle. Banobras already work in a framework for the issuance of Banobras Sustainable Bonds, and the main components are the following. First of all, the use of funds in basic infrastructure projects, infrastructure damaged by natural disaster, wind farms, photovoltaic and hydroelectric parks, sustainable transportation, wastewater treatment plants, hospitals, and energy efficiency projects. Second, the evaluation and project selection. Sustainable Resources Monitoring Unit are the project selection with positive environmental and social impact and the approval of the projects accepted by the framework. The project tracking, monitoring the collection of outstanding credits, mandate the investment of the resources, and monthly report of the use of the resources. And finally, the reporting, resource allocation report, impact report, qualitative and quantitative indicators, and the compliance review. Next one, please. The results of the Sustainable Bank Strategy are the following. At the end of March 2021, Banobras' sustainable credit portfolio amounted more than 38 billion pesos or $2 billion. The projects are divided into social projects and green projects. In social projects, we have basic affordable infrastructure that amounts 681 million pesos and is financed through the Banobras FAIS program with 85 municipalities in 10 states of the country. Disaster recovery amounts 7.5 billion pesos, financing 12 states government through the financing program for reconstruction of federative entities. The public services infrastructure amounts 7.6 billion pesos with 6 hospitals in 5 states of the country, 728 beds and 900,000 users. In the green projects, we have renewable energy with amount of 17.5 billion pesos, financing for 9 wind farms, 6 solar parks, 1 hydroelectric plant, generating 507,000 gigawatts of energy annually. Sustainable transport with 2.7 billion pesos, financing for 3 urban projects. Energy efficiency with 396 million pesos, financing to 41 municipalities in 11 states of the country. And finally, we have water efficiency and water and wastewater management for Mexican 2.1 billion pesos, financing 3 water plants that together have the capacity for 34,000 liters. It's important to mention the following. The sustainable credit portfolio represents the 6.5% of the total credit portfolio. And the total credit portfolio in Banobras is 578 billion pesos or $29 billion. The bank, as already stated, is changing processes and internal structure to grow the percentage of the sustainable portfolio. Growing the sustainable portfolio will allow Banobras to tap more frequently the ESG bond market. Thank you. The next one. Finally, we have Banobras sustainable bond issuances. Banobras has been working in creating a sustainable curve that should be below the traditional curve. The sustainable curve should work as a reference for other local sustainable issuers. Sustainable bonds generate more cost than traditional bonds. This is because the unit that I already mentioned in the past slides, the listing procedures in the exchange, and the second opinion by Sustainalytics and other costs that are generated with these sustainable bonds. So that's why we think that sustainable bonds, the curve, should be below the traditional curve. And as you can see in the graphic, we already achieved that objective here in the Mexican market. The next, please. Banobras sustainable issuances. Banobras has been working closely with the market participants in order to provide different sustainable bonds in terms of rates, tenors, and currencies. We already issue in Mexican pesos and inflation-linked bonds. Recently, the demand by local investors for sustainable bonds has increased significantly, which has reduced the spread versus the reference. Since 2017, the total amount of sustainable bonds issued in Mexico are 43 billion pesos or $2.1 billion. As you can see in the graphics, for the floating rate bonds in the three years tenor, before 2021, the spread was around -3 basis points. This year, we already tied to -9 basis points. For the fixed bond in pesos, the spread was just below 50 basis points. And this year, we already tied to 33 basis points. And finally, for the 15-year inflation-linked bond, the spread was before in 35 basis points, and we already tied this year to 14 basis points. This is all for me. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Juan. Muchas gracias. Okay, I'm back to moderate the panel, and let me introduce you to a very interesting panel. Yeah, thank you very much. So let me just leave this on for a moment to introduce you to everyone. So I'm very pleased to have with me on the panel, first of all, Alba Aguilar, who is the CEO of the Green Finance Advisory Council. Then we have Jorge Girault, I hope I pronounced that correctly, who is the Senior Vice President Finance at Prologis, Mexico. Then Marta Marron, who heads up the Debt Capital Markets Department at BBVA in Mexico. Next one, Alonso Pedrero, who is the Head of New Financing Projects and Sustainability at Vinta, Mexico. And last but not least, we have Mario Torres Falcon, who is an investment manager with Finance in Motion. Welcome, everyone. Okay, let us start off. So I have already given an overview on what the principles are, and also I've shown a slide on the global development of the market. But it would be good to find out a little bit more on this panel, of course, how the Mexican market is doing, what are we seeing there, what are the issuances that come out, and also what's the experience from investors. Maybe to start us off, I'll start with you, Alba, if you could just very briefly introduce your institution as well to anyone that isn't familiar with the Green Investment Board, and also just tell us what you are doing.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you for the invitation, ICMA. I would say that the Green Finance Advisory Board is a representative organization of the Mexican financial sector, which born in 2016 from the consensus or a series of ideas that we believe are fundamental for moving from a traditional financial market to a more resilient, inclusive, green, and social committed one. And our main objectives are to share the best practices on sustainable finance, to build capacities, and to mobilize capital among the market participants. And our platform has achieved the integration of diverse institutions that represent all sectors of the Mexican financial system, with a unique proposal and one shared agenda, headed by high-level leaders whose experience strengthens the proposals and initiatives that the Green Finance Advisory Board promotes to contribute to the development of the green and sustainable finance in our country. And it is made up of key stakeholders as financial associations, institutional investors, development, commercial and multilateral banks, corporations, independent consultants, rating agencies, academy, among other members. And the Green Finance Advisory Board is divided in 4 working groups. Number 1, we talk about taxonomies, principles, as the ICMA has done, instruments and markets, And the number 2, we talk about public policy, talking with market regulators and supervisors. And the number 3 is about education programs and capacity building through webinars, seminars, and ESG certifications. And the number 4 is about the channels that we have to mobilize green and sustainable capital, in order to find finance solutions that require here in Mexico new spaces for public and private collaboration. And I have to say that the main dialogue is around raising awareness among finance actors about climate change, which represents one of the greatest challenges of our time, generating not only risk, but also opportunities for the society, the economy, and also for investors. And we know that the financial market have a big role to play in the response to climate change, and it will require large capital investments and key sectors, such Banobras told us very, very specific, like renewable energy, sustainable infrastructure, and more sectors like this. And finally, we know that that we need in Mexico to build a complete market infrastructure for sustainable finance. We need to enhance capacity building, but we also require a common language, principles, as ICMA has, performance indicators, new standards, tools, and innovative products, and of course, everything, forgetting all of these elements, are part of our duty in the next years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alba. That is very interesting. And I certainly have a lot of topics to come back to you on with the breadth of what you're doing. Let me maybe follow with Marta, who of course also has many roles. You're mainly an underwriter, but if you could just start off, I guess most people will be familiar with BBVA, but you know, if you could just start off with what BBVA has done in the sustainable finance space. I know you're also an issuer in Spain, and perhaps with your international view, perhaps give us a bit of a comparison between what you see in international sustainable finance markets, or more specifically sustainable bonds markets versus Latin America, and more specifically Mexico.
Yes, of course, and thank you very much for the invitation. Well, as you know, BBVA has been very active. I'm in charge of the debt capital markets division in Mexico. So we have been very active in placing this kind of bonds, in the local market, and we have been pioneers, for example, for the new SLBs that you previously mentioned. As you know, BBVA has one commitment, a global commitment of helping customers to transition to a more sustainable world. So this strategic priority was defined by BBVA on a global scale since 2017. And in particular, we are continuously maximizing the origination of sustainable financing, bonds and loans. This is in particular the strategy of BBVA. We have a goal of originating up to 100 billion euros between 2018 and 2025. So this is the strategic priority or objective of BBVA in these terms of ESG goals. And yes, as you mentioned, BBVA had an inaugural bond in 2019 in Spain. This was the first green bond of a bank in the European Union. And it became also the first private institution to issue a COVID bond in 2019. This is very important because this was the first COVID bond in the world. So in Mexico, it's very important to mention that BBVA was also pioneer, because BBVA Mexico was placed the first green bond of a private bank as issuer in the local market. This was a two-tranche transaction, and one of the tranches was a green note. As you know, all the proceeds will be invested in renewable energy projects, sustainable transport initiatives, and other, water, waste management, and among others. So in Mexico, we have seen the market developing. We will talk about this later, but I think BBVA has been an important actor in the local market.
Thank you very much, Marta. And of course, one of the companies that you work together with is Prologis. And we have a representative on the panel here, Jorge. If you could just give us, just first of all, maybe tell us a little bit about what Prologis is and what you do, and then talk to us about your experience with issuing a green bond.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you for having me in this panel. And hello and good morning to all the panelists. It's a pleasure to be with you. I work for Prologis. Prologis is a publicly traded REIT in the New York Stock Exchange. It's about a little bit north of 100 billion market cap, so the largest industrial real estate REIT in the world, and it owns and manages, owns 47% and manages a FIBRA, which is a publicly traded Mexican REIT, if you may, in Mexico. We are focused on investing and developing industrial warehouses mainly for logistics, but in Mexico also for manufacturing in certain markets. So that's Prologis. I work in the finance department, and last year in 2019 in December, with Marta, we issued a $375 million green bond, the first done by FIBRA Prologis Mexico and by a publicly traded real estate firm in Mexico in dollar terms, to refinance existing debt. So, and this was done thanks to obviously a green bond framework, certified buildings, LEED certified buildings, and the use of proceeds to do that. And then back in 2020, we did another issuance for $70 million, also with BBVA, doing the same thing. And we also issued $300 million additional of a private placement with insurance companies, which partially was also green. So we entered into this green financing scenario. And together with all that, we also did a line of credit, which is a sustainable line of credit with its specific KPIs to finance our acquisitions on the green side of the arena. So that's who we are, and we work. We have refinanced about $750 million. Most of it in the last 12 months. Most of it has been green finance.
Thank you. And let me just follow that up with a question. You mentioned you've raised the funds to refinance existing debt. Why did you do that with a green bond? What brought you to the decision to issue a green bond rather than a normal bond or plain vanilla bond?
That's a great question, Simone, and I get that question all the time, especially with our investors. Why refinance with greens? Everybody, when they think about green financing, they think about what Marta said, or for example, what Juan said, that they use the money for green projects, to invest in new green projects. Well, the fact of the matter is that we had a portfolio since 2000 and since year 2000 in Mexico, which we floated into 2014, and we were the portfolio was evolving to a green portfolio, meaning LEED certified or BOMA certified. Let me put it this way: the green footprint was growing, but it wasn't big enough at the beginning. So once in 2019 we had a sizable portfolio LEED certified, and we needed to refinance debt, and we said, well, I can move this exchange this short-term debt, which was the case, with long-term debt in the green area, or I can use a non-green area. But we have a very strong commitment as Prologis US, but also in Mexico, in the ESG front. And we wanted to show the market that we care about it. Yes, it has to do a lot with publicity, if you may, and also you get a lot of demand, and because of that, you can push down the spreads. I get that. That's part of the pragmatical part. But also you take some commitments, you take some KPIs, and you need to have your management of those properties be in such a way that you can justify the LEED or BOMA certification. So it does bring a, let me put it, maybe it's the wrong word, but pressure on management to do everything in the green area of the real estate business.
Okay, that's interesting. And you already mentioned management, and it's obviously that's the case very much with sustainable bond issuance, not just green bonds. It should really also involve the C-suite, if you will, senior management, and it really brings together different departments. So it's no longer just the corporate finance department or the treasury department. I don't know, you probably have that same experience, right? That all of a sudden you worked with a lot of different colleagues.
It's a culture, Simon. It's no longer a green stamp on the building or on the document. It's a culture. It's a way of doing things, and it has to come from the top. So that not only on the green side, but on the G side, on the S side.
Yes, and that's also, by the way, why we this year in the Green Bond Principles latest version highlighted that you should also communicate your strategy, even if you do a use of proceeds bond. Let us hear from another issuer about his experience. Alonso, let me move on to you. And perhaps you could also just start off by telling us what Vinta does, what Vinta is, and your experience. I believe you have by now issued 4 not green bonds, but a mix of green and social, the sustainability bonds. If you could just tell us a little bit more about that.
Yes, thank you, Simone. It's a pleasure to be here and with this great panel. So Vinta is a Mexican land developer and home builder. We're a publicly traded company in the Mexican Stock Exchange. We started operations 18 years ago, and since then we have built 50,000 homes. We operate in 6 states across the nation, basically Quintana Roo, Nuevo León, and Mexico City centers, so Estado de Mexico, Querétaro, Puebla, and Hidalgo. We are actually one of the largest EDGE-certified home builders worldwide. We're actually the largest. We have certified 6,000 homes, and we attend the affordable and middle income segments of the population. In 2018, Vinta issued its sustainability bond framework, and this bond framework wanted to capture all the positive externalities that you have both on the social and on the environmental sides. So, for example, on the social side, when we develop communities, we also provide schools. We have built 754 schools in 754 classrooms in 28 schools. We have also developed 9 health clinics. We have developed accessible homes for limited mobility home buyers. All those elements that we're incorporating within our social perspective. From the environmental side, we are working, when we develop also the communities, we do the green spaces. We have created 334 rain collection systems throughout our communities. We have built 9 water treatment plants that service not only Vinta communities, but also the entire municipality. And we have developed, for example, the zero gas home, which is a home that uses no gas at all. It has a meaningful impact on CO2 emissions. So based on those features, we issued the sustainability bond framework, which was aligned with both the social bond principles of the ICMA and the green bond principles of the ICMA. And we received a positive SPO by Sustainalytics. And based on this framework, we issued the first sustainability bond framework by a home builder in Latin America in 2018. This was an 800 million issuance, a 7-year bullet. It was 1.5 times oversubscribed. It also had a positive SPO by Sustainalytics. It had a partial credit guarantee from the IDB to support the risk profile of this first transaction. And it had the highest sustainability rating of XP1 as first issuance. Since then, Vinta has actually issued, as you well mentioned, 4 sustainability bonds. We've raised around 1.9 billion Mexican peso through these issuances. The last one was in November of 2020. And they all capture these elements that we're talking about of the positive impact in social and environmental sides that home building has and the profound impact that it can create within the communities and regions that it works with.
Thank you. And just for the audience, perhaps there's a few people that don't know what an SPO is. That's a second party opinion. That's one type of an external review that you can get. It's in fact the most common one. Thank you, Alonso. Let me just follow up on saying, we do see quite a few sustainability bonds. In fact, Banobras mentioned sustainability bonds before as well. So we see a lot of those being issued in Mexico. And, as I explained before, and as you also just mentioned, it's a mix between green and social projects. Sometimes we see issuers choosing those if they don't have sufficient green projects or sufficient social projects. But I understand with Vinta, that's not the case for you. It's really because what you do with regards to residential buildings, for example, it's really a case where the green and the social side should come together or do go together, right?
Absolutely. I think one of the key aspects with Vinta is how we complement both the social and the environmental side through our shared value business model. So since we started, we have always been a very innovative home builder. Back in 2003, the first homes that we actually sold were internet enabled. They were actually sold with a computer. And back then that was a big deal. I mean, the technology gap was pretty big in Mexico, and we were trying to do something to support that. That was a very successful project. There was a financial mortgage product that was developed to support that type of project. And ever since, we have constantly been moving in the innovation path. And what we have realized is that both social and environmental aspects have to go within that innovation path that I'm talking about. It's also very important to mention that the affordable and middle income segments of the population, it's where you have the biggest impact. You can build a very sustainable, environmental friendly home with a large amount of resources, state of the art materials, proper design, et cetera. The challenge, however, is to bring that impact or that capacity into an affordable segment, into the accessibility for society. And that's really where you have to become very, very innovative and very creative. And I think Vinta has done a great job at it. And so much so that with this framework that we issued in 2018, we're trying to capture that essence.
Thank you, and I'll come back to you again on that. But let me just move on and perhaps jump back to Marta. Marta, if you could just, we've heard two issuers now, one of them you worked with more closely, but what do you, in general, as head of debt capital markets, what do you tell your clients, or rather also important and interesting, what do your clients come to you with in terms of questions, maybe?
Yes, Simon. Well, one of the key objectives, I think, or one of the first questions of our clients is which is the benefit, in terms of price. As Juan was mentioning, yes, it has been proved that we have an oversubscription for this kind of transactions because it's obviously right now the interest for investors to acquire this kind of bonds. But there is not a specific number of basis points that you can reduce the price, but it has been proved that you can get better financing conditions just because you have a great oversubscription. So at the beginning, yes, the cost, for example, was a concern, the cost of the certification and the SPO, as you previously mentioned. But they have a lot of benefits. For example, they have wider demand. They have a wider investor base because in some cases, when you offer a format in which maybe some investors as Afores, pension funds, are not participating usually, but this is a bond that is labeled with an ESG label, you have them participating aggressively. So you have price advantages also because this has improved also in the book buildings. You have media impact. This is very important because after the issuance, for example, Prologis had this enormous media impact of the first REIT in Mexico issuing a green bond and also based on a global framework. So you have a great media impact, and also maybe you have a very positive impact because you align the financing strategy with the achievement of environmental objectives, or targets. So I think this is the most common question is the price, and of course for investors we have some benefits also, and some clients also ask about the benefits for investors. I think investors right now are really concerned about contributing with alternatives to mitigate the climate crisis. And for them, this is a great alternative. Acquiring these kind of bonds is a great alternative to diversify their portfolio. And also for them, it's very important, the transparency and the access to information once the bond is placed. No? So these are mainly the questions and concerns of clients to issue a bond. No, we have placed 26 bonds up to now in the market since 2016. BBVA has led the placement of 26 bonds, and I think this has been the most common question, no, about the price benefits. No?
And when it comes to the currency, what do we see most in Mexico? What do you see most? Is it typically placement or issuances in local currency, in Mexican peso, or
yes,
or rather international currencies such as US dollars or euros to attract an international investor audience as well?
Well, we are even more pushing the euro clearable transactions in Mexico, but right now I would said that in the local market we have a preference for pesos, and of course there was a timing to issue dollars. No, there is also a market for dollar denominated bonds. We saw it with Prologis because before Prologis, the bonds that were placed in dollars were bonds of private banks, no? For example, BBVA, Santander, HSBC. And for corporates in 2012, Peñoles was the only issuer in dollars. No, so I think for this, the current conditions of the market right now, we saw it and we prove it with Prologis. We have a very large transaction with Jorge, and a very successful transaction with almost all of Obras participating. No?
Thank you. And let me finally
mostly is pesos, no? Mostly is pesos.
Yeah,
yes.
That's very interesting actually as well. And then I guess you also have private placements as well as the public offerings. Let me finally bring in Mario Torres Falcon as well. Now, Mario, if you also could just very briefly tell us what Finance in Motion is and does, and then I think it would be very interesting to hear from your view as an investor. And I'm emphasizing that because, as you will hear in a second, Finance in Motion actually has other roles as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Simon, for the invitation. I'm happy to be here sharing with you. Finance in Motion is an impact investor manager. It's based in Germany. The company administers several funds, several mandates across the globe. For Latin America, the company is managing 2 funds. One of them is called Eco Business Fund, with the mission to promote financing for the agribusiness sector. The second one is Elia Green, which has an objective to promote local capital markets and supporting issuers that wants to go into the sustainable debt market. So the objective is to invest in new issuances and provide technical assistance to these institutions, either corporate or financial institutions, to tap the market. So as Juan was saying, there are additional costs and work to do before issuing one of these instruments, and the fund is in the capacity to support these institutions in going through that work, and once the instruments goes public, to invest in the issuance. No, so in a nutshell, that's what we do. The Finance in Motion is managing around 3.2 billion euros in total asset under management, and this new fund is starting last year, so we are around 100 million for closing this year, and with a lot of interest in building a pipeline for Mexico.
And how do you, as an investor, see, sustainable bonds in general? I know the Eco Fund or Eco Business Fund that you mentioned is actually a fund that invests in those labeled bonds. what are your views? What's perhaps interesting to watch out for if there are any other investors in the audience watching, but also I guess it's always interesting for issuers as well to hear what investors think.
No, I think that the fund was initiated by the European Union through the German development bank KfW. So they have a very clear objective of promoting the instruments. So the fund still is agnostic regarding the credit rating of the potential institution. So I think that the sweet spot is to promote smaller institutions to go and tap the market, probably with smaller ticket size issuances that the fund could eventually acquire them all. But I think that, as I said, there is a key point in supporting new issuers going into the market and explaining them how these markets work through this technical assistance. So as I said, we are not focusing on a specific type of instrument, but open to support new issuers.
Okay, thank you. And it's interesting that you said it's also rating agnostic, because of course the majority of sustainable bonds we currently see in the market are investment grade rated, but investors are always looking for more high yield issuers out there as well. Thank you. I'll come back to the technical assistance problem later. Let me come back to Alba. Alba, maybe we could talk a bit more about what you are seeing in the Mexican market, because you are involved in, as you also said in your explanatory remarks, in anything, green bonds, social bonds, sustainable bonds. I don't know if you also looked at sustainability linked bonds. Perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about that.
Thank you. I want to share with you a quick overview, of what is happening in the sustainable bond markets in Mexico. The sustainable bond market is growing from 2015 with the first green bond issued by Nafinsa, a development bank, and now Banobras is taking the leadership in this sector. Since then, we have seen year after year a continuous increase in the amount issued, but in the last 2 years we can see a real boom in the market. We have diverse types of labels, issuers, and currencies. We have now a total amount of $14.5 billion in sustainable bond market, including green, social, sustainable, SLB, and sovereign bond. I have to say that all these issues have a framework, a second opinion, and some of them have also a certification from Climate Bonds Initiative. And all of them have also an annual impact reports. As we already hear, the oversubscription is almost the rule in every placement. Today, the market share for each label is as follows: 23% for green bonds, 6% for social bonds that include COVID and gender bonds, and 25% for sustainable bonds, and the biggest is the 29% for sustainability linked bonds. And also we have 16% for sovereign sustainable bonds. As I said previously, 2020 was a record year despite the pandemic, and with an annual issued amount of $3 billion, which was 6 times the amount issued in 2019. In 2020, we have very, very key points. The first gender bond issued by FIRA, the first green bond issued by AFIBRA, read in English, and this is Prologis bond. And the first green bond by a multilateral bank, and it was IDB, and the first sovereign bond related with SDGs. And we have the largest market share was held by corporate issuers with the 45% of the total amount in 2020, sorry. Now the 2021 has already broken last year's record with an annual issued amount of $8.5 billion, nearly 3 times the amount issued in 2020. And the present year has featured the first COVID bond by the Central American Bank for Economic Integration, debate, 6 sustainable linked bonds from corporate issuers placed in international markets, and the first gender bond issued by a multilateral bank, the second sovereign bond related to the SDGs, and the first sustainability linked bond placed in the local market in pesos. Likewise, the largest market share was held by the corporate issuers with 62% of the total amount. Comparing Mexico to similar economies in the region as Brazil, we are proud to say that now we reduce the gap regarding the annual amount issued in 2021, which is 25% less than Brazil's amount that is $11.5 billion of sustainable bonds. And just for reference, the gap that we have with Brazil in 2020 was 46%. And now we reduce this gap and now it's 25%. Finally, we have a positive perspective for the next years. We think that we will see more sustainable bonds issued by corporates and governments in order to finance new sustainable strategies, and also for finance the transition to a greener economy with the principles that is very important in Mexico, the standardization and the transparency that the market participants require right now. And that's my quick overview.
Thank you very much. Yes, and indeed, investors do want standardization, which is why the principles have really become the global de facto standard, because although they're voluntary guidelines, issuers tend to follow them because investors like it as well. Let's look a little bit more about at the principal components. Perhaps I mentioned in the beginning that they have 4 core components, and one that's increasingly important to investors especially is the reporting category. Reporting is really divided between allocation reporting and impact reporting, with again impact reporting being on the one hand the more difficult one to do for issuers, but one that more and more required and requested by investors. Let me perhaps jump back to one of the issuers. Alonso, you already talked about the green and social projects that are covered within your sustainability bonds. But what I'm now interested in is how do you go about the impact reporting? What do you measure there?
Thank you, Simone. Yes, reporting is key. One of the key aspects of ESG is a transparency requirement that issuers have. And in Vinta, that's paramount. Since 2018, we have been issuing our sustainability report. So all that impact that we have through these sustainability ratings that we do is contained within this report. We actually stepped that up a little bit back in our last issuance in 2020. The Vinta 20X SDG bond was not only compliant with both the social and the green bond principles of ICMA, that one was also compliant with the UNDP's sustainability bonds aligned with the SDGs. In that bond, actually, we committed to track 8 SDG bonds, 4 in the C category, which is the highest. It's the ABC classification they have, and 4 on the B category, which is the middle category reporting. We have 27 KPIs, and you will find that also in our reporting. So you're talking about, again, energy, water, ecological, social, gender, labor force, and that part of the reporting becomes very quantitative. So that's very important. The social and the green bond principles give some leeway for the qualitative aspect of the reporting, but the UNDP principles also provide the requirement of the quantitative aspect of the reporting. So numbers are just cold, but we're showing that impact through that issuance. One of the other key aspects of it is that, as Jorge properly commented earlier, that this has to come from the top. And one of the things that ESG, which leads to the sustainability aspect of the issuances, is the transparency and the institutionalization of the companies that issue that. So the reporting has to make these issuers cognizant of what they're committing to, and the transparency they are required, and that the framework that has to be used for institutionalizing these issuers. One of the challenges that we see for companies to become, sustainable issuers is to understand that they're a corporation. They have to manage themselves professionally and institutionally through world-class practices. So I think that's a very important aspect, and I think it means that we have been working on that since our partners joined. Just to give you an example, we had IFC as one of the first shareholders back in 2008. They made an equity investment for around 10% of the company. And since that moment, all the process of best practices and internal government strengthening took off. IDB came in 2013. In 2019, Proparco, the French development agency, also capitalized the company for around 7% of it. And last year in December, the SDG fund from Denmark, managed by IFU, also made another equity capitalization of around $20 million. And one of the key aspects that this brings to this type from this type of investments is strengthening the best practices that the companies have to follow, both on the social and on the environmental impact and on the governance side.
And how do you, maybe you can tell us a bit more about how do you actually go about gathering these, the impact, the results, if you will, the outcomes, the output, and ideally the actual impact achieved for your green and social projects? I guess that's an enormous effort internally. How do you gather all that data?
Well, we have actually become really good at it. One of the key things that we did is we established a sustainability committee where members of the board actually participate on this committee. All the key aspects of the operation of the company is gathered. We have to coordinate with the internal departments so that we can get that data. Also, as Martha said, one of the key questions from the issuers is how much or how expensive are these bonds going to be? But it's also all the internal process that you need to do to comply with the reporting. And the best way to do it is to follow best practices. So establishing a sustainability committee, it's really good. Knowing how to report it, and you have to talk to each internal department. And in the case of Vinta, for example, that we work in 6 different states across the nation, we have 17 development projects under construction. We have to talk to each one of them individually. So there's no hiding under the sun. We need to be able to measure the investments that we do, how much goes to parks, schools, infrastructure, social infrastructure, environmental infrastructure, and we have to report that.
Yes, certainly a lot of work. Let me jump back to Jorge, also from his experience within as an issuer, and of course you are mainly on the green side, which is also very relevant at the moment, or especially relevant in background with COP. We're still in the conference of the party at the moment going on in Glasgow. There they talk a lot about renewable energy, energy efficiency, and also green buildings, which are the main projects you can finance. There are other projects under the Green Bond Principles. There are 10 project categories, but these are really the ones that are quite often financed. Can you tell us a bit more about also perhaps the reporting on those? I also, with green buildings, it's very, often issuers also use certifications such as LEED and BREEAM. Can you perhaps give us a bit more insight into how you analyze those projects and also how you report on them?
Certainly, Simon. The quick answer to your question is, for doing something like this, we need and by this I mean green financing. We need a certification from the green side, far and beyond LEED or BOMA or EDGE, which is Sustainalytics in our case. They do a report that includes the portfolio of Mexico, and that is the base for investors to see that there is a certification, such as you would see in, Standard & Poor's or Fitch or HR. You have a certification on that front from an external advisor or credit company, if you may, which is Sustainalytics. They issue a report which falls into the portfolio that we finance. That's for the investor, so that they see that there is a report that is specific to this portfolio. In terms of reporting and what we show and etc., one of the advantages of these green bonds in Mexico is that they're fairly new. Marta mentioned that they're new. There is a lot of room to cover, meaning there is no set rules like in other jurisdictions. For example, Europe is very specific. Europe is much more specific. The reports are much more cumbersome in terms of what you have to show to the investors and on an annual basis. Here, it's a little bit more flexible. We're getting there. We're getting more and more into this report. We issue an annual report where you see the buildings that are LEED certified, the buildings that are BOMA certified, and some other metrics that CO2, etc. You see all these metrics, and you can see how pieces of the portfolio support each of the bonds that we have or the financing that we have done. No, so you see it there. I've seen the European ones that are more, as I said, encumbered. There is a lot of information there, but we have been working, for example, with the Afores, the AMEFIBRA, which is the Association of Fibras, the NAREIT for Mexican purposes. As an association, we talked to Afores and the pension funds in Mexico, and we got an agreement on what this report will have. Now, let me say this. In this ESG world, there's no status quo. No? Always evolving, always evolving. There's something new. You saw it in the COP26 or whatever it was now in Europe. There's new things that we have to look into, and that's a challenge. I mean, what new things come, and not only as a company, because as you said, the C-suite has to have it in the DNA, but when you're in a certain region, the region has to also understand this ESG framework, meaning the country. That makes it easier or more difficult, depending on where you are. So Europe has other parameters, Mexico and the US has others, and Canada. So we adjust to those kind of frameworks.
Thank you. And also interestingly, you mentioned pension funds, the Afores, because mostly when we talk about investors, we really talk about asset managers, but very importantly, you have the big end investors who have the big money. And what do they think? Is there a growing interest in sustainable bonds? I guess they get in turn being asked a lot by their members as well.
Yeah, let me give you a couple of examples. The AMAFORE, which is the Association of Afores, the pension funds, I think they're asking for 2022 for Afores to look into more ESG or green financing. Some Afores, some pension funds will only do green financing, or maybe I should use the word mostly. And this report that AMAFORE is asking for the issuer is something that we did with, like I said, with AMEFIBRA. So we heard what investors are going to need, or the regulator for investors are going to need. And most of the FIBRAs, I think all of them, issued a ESG report to the extent it was necessary this year. It's publicly available, as we did in advance. Prior the requirement that it's outside in the market, that it's 2022. So yeah, I mean, you have to hear the investors. It's not something that you do because you want to do it only. There's stakeholders, there's investors, there is new rules, there is government, there is such. It's not a linear way of thinking. It's more broad, and you have to take care of it. And it's only not the green, but also the G, I mean governance, and also the S. So all that falls into the way you do things, the way you think, and the way you report.
Thank you. And let me say before we move on, if the audience has any questions, you're very welcome to just send them through the chat, and we can either take them at the end, or I can, if they fit into the conversation, I can pick them up during the panel conversation. Marta, we have spoken a lot about green bonds and sustainability bonds, which also have social projects. But what about social bonds? We haven't actually seen that many social bonds issued, I think, in Mexico, and SLBs. We see a real boom of SLBs in Brazil, for example, but I don't think we have seen that many SLBs in Mexico yet. What are your views on that, and also in terms of what are your clients saying?
Yes, I think, Simon, that this is a market that is in constant evolution. No, we, for example, are now working on a confidential social bond. So I think we're gonna see more and more bonds of this type. But a bond that was very important in Mexico, and I think that is what diversification brings us to Mexico, no, and brings attention to Mexico, because we have a gender bond, no, here in Mexico. We have the FIRA bond that was exclusively focused on the financing for women, no, for entrepreneur women, so in the rural sector, no. So this was very important. Alba mentioned this before, but I think this was one of the most important bonds in LATAM. And this brings attention to Mexico. Maybe there are not too many social bonds, but as you said, sustainable bonds also cover social and green principles. No? So regarding SLBs, not that was your question. I think this was originated, no, or this kind of bonds were originated in Europe, no, at the first time with Enel. And after that, I thought that would be slower coming to Mexico, but investors were concerned about what Alonso mentioned and Jorge mentioned about the transparency of information, no, because it is very important what the keynote that Alonso mentioned. There is not hiding after the sun or behind the sun, because there is a lot of importance from investors to have access to information on the projects that in which the companies are investing, the clear measurable targets, no, and to have specifically an impact, no, on the bond if the targets or the KPIs are not met, no. So as you know, SLBs, no, sustainability-linked bonds, are these kind of bonds that have an impact on the structural or financial characteristics of the bond if the ESG objectives that were predefined at the moment of the issuance are not achieved. No? So, for example, if an issuer does not achieve the water usage KPIs that they established with a specific timeline, no, at the beginning of the issuance, there is a step up in the coupon, no? Whenever the issuer does not comply with these KPIs, no? So it is very important, these kind of bonds. There are two SLBs right now in the market, only two, because we placed Volaris, no, a few weeks ago, and also COF, no, Coca-Cola FEMSA. In particular, Volaris was committed to meeting annual CO2 issuances per revenue. No, it's a measure, and this target was predetermined when the bond was placed. No, so if it falls short on these targets, the issuer pays up, no, and the investor is compensated. No, this is one of the more important concerns from Afores. No, for example, we have some Afores concerned about transparency, about if the company really has an impact, if they lose the SPO or the certification on the green bond, no, on the ESG bond. So I think this is a market, as I said previously said, in constant evolution. Maybe we are going to see more bonds like this, because this has been a complete success between investors, no, and these have very high acceptance in these two first bonds that we placed in the market, no. So for investors, the key is transparency and integrity, no, of the issuer. This is the key, and in SLBs, I think this is covered, no.
Thank you, and that's true for investors. That really is key, not just with SLBs, also with use proceeds bonds. You know, you have to be transparent, and you know, it's obviously in the issuer's interest to keep their integrity as well. So we haven't seen that many SLBs. SLBs have really kind of emerged as an almost ideal instrument for sectors in transition. And Mexico, I would see there are a couple of sectors that need to transition as well. We have the fossil fuel industry, of course, agriculture, transportation, just to name a few. So maybe we'll see more SLBs in that space as well, because they might not necessarily have green projects to finance, although we have, of course, heard about sustainable transportation as well. Let me come back to Mario again. Mario, you also offer technical assistance to issuers, or rather new issuers, potential issuers. What do you advise them with, and what questions do they have if they're completely new? We've just spoken to two established issuers, but what makes them come to you?
Oh, definitely. As we've been hearing from all the panelists, there's a momentum in this market. There are several institutions that could be interested in expanding their financing and tapping the sustainable debt markets. Of course, what they first need to understand or want to understand is if they are eligible, if they have the projects, or if they have the policies or the best practices that also Alonso was talking about. So what we are trying to do is to provide them with very early stage support, to bring some consultants to get into their policies, to recommend them this sustainability committee, for example, that we're talking about by two of the panelists, and to provide this capacity building and awareness from top management that, as I think Jorge said, it is a culture, no, and it takes some time, some work. So very early stage work, and getting the support from experts is always very helpful. So what the LA Green Fund tries to do is to provide with no cost this support to help the institution understand the principles, whether they will be able to bring a framework for a social bond or a sustainability bond or a sustainability linked bond, or a green bond. In those early stages, I think there's the key to understand if the institution will be able to move ahead in this area. But what the fund is offering is to not only provide this early stage assistance, but also to pay for the second party opinion, to pay for the framework, and to continue supporting the institution during the reporting phase. No, so with this, we believe that we'll be promoting more institutions to get into the market, and happy to build the network and potential opportunities in Mexico. No?
Thank you. And let me perhaps finish with the two issuers. Just picking up on something you just said, you pay for second party opinions and so on, because of course there are a lot of additional costs as well that you have with sustainable bonds issuance. But let me go to you first, Jorge, and then Alonso. Is it worth it? Have you seen your costs being covered? Is it worth the perhaps growing investor demand? I guess you expand on investors as well.
Let me divide it into two. The quick answer to your question is yes. But let me divide it into two. First, the financial side. Which is your question? I cannot tell you how much spread we save or cost we save because we do our green financing. My guess is about 20 basis points, but it's just a guess. And what happens is that the world is moving into that direction. Reality bites. It doesn't matter what other people think. The thing is that the wave of green financing and ESG is moving in that direction. The world is moving in that direction. That said, it's what I call the hamburger game. I have 5 hamburgers and I have 20 people hungry. They're going to pay, good amount of money for my hamburgers. So that's what happens, but the spread goes down. So it's totally worth it from a financial standpoint. Maybe 10 years ago, that was a question mark. 5 years ago was a question. People were saying it's a lot of, reporting, other costs. It's totally worth it. Investors are looking for that. And you will get, the demand that you require to get a better pricing on this side. No? That's answer number one. Answer number two is it shouldn't be other ways. Meaning if the world is going in that direction, to the extent you can do that, you should. Makes all the sense in the world, shows your commitment to not only the green, but the S and the G. I've seen, I think the word is pink bonds that are based on women, for example. You mentioned, I think you mentioned Marta mentioned the COVID fund. To the extent you can put a label to the bond because it has a meaning, not only the label, not only the stamp, it makes all the work in the sense in the world. If you don't think like that, and you think I can do another bond, to the extent that you can, again, that some people can't because of the business or they have to do a lot of work to get there. We couldn't do it before. That's a fact. And now we did it because we have the volume and we have the certification required. But once that you can, you should. It makes all the sense in the world, not only from the pragmatical, financial, mathematical side. Yes, that makes sense. But on the way you think in this world and this new reality, you have to be there. Again, to the extent you can.
Yeah, indeed. And last word maybe to Alonso as well. Alonso, are we going to see another sustainability bond or another type of sustainable bond from Vinta, or what's up next on the agenda?
Absolutely. 77% of our debt is sustainable. And more importantly, right now, as Jorge correctly says, it's no longer a nice to have, it's a must have. The fact that Mario is one of the investors shows that the available money for investment is now requiring those elements. The stats that Alba has shared, how we're reaching 8-9 billion of issuances, 11 in Brazil, showing you that the world's making that shift. In that sense, for example, on the sustainability-linked bond, which we have started substantially from Vinta's perspective, we're taking it also one step further. Right now, we're on the follow-on process. We're going to issue debt on the debt capital markets. It's a $100 million issuance. And this issuance in particular, we created another framework. This framework is an equity investment framework, sustainable equity investment framework. And we borrowed a lot from ICMA's sustainability-linked bonds. We made 3 commitments. One, it's in CO2 emission savings, water savings, and embedded energy in materials savings. Our commitment, or Vinta's commitment, is that by 2030, through 19,500 homes, we will have saved 81 million tons of CO2, or will have been saved through Vinta's certified homes, 7 million cubic meters of water, and 4 million gigajoules of energy savings because of the use of efficient materials. This framework has already received a positive SPO by PCS and by Sustainalytics. And right now we're on the last mile of this equity issuance. So if you are interested, or anyone in the audience is interested, please just go to vinta.com. And we're very excited about this first attempt. Hopefully we'll be the first sustainable equity issuance in the debt capital markets in the Americas. We know that Europe is a bit further ahead in that road. And that's going to be one of the key aspects, and not stop innovating.
Thank you. I think that's a nice note to finish on, especially in terms of COP26 going on. And it's good to hear everything that you are achieving. And that's, of course, also in the big picture of achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. With that, I thank the panel very much. Thank you to all the speakers. You can see a slide on the screen. We have education courses as well. I've given you a brief introduction in the beginning, but if you'd like to learn more about the sustainable bonds market, then you can go to our website. We offer either self-study courses or live courses, everything virtual still. Hopefully we're going to move to in-person trainings at some point again. And also, if you want to read up on anything that we have discussed, especially the impact reporting that I mentioned, there are impact reporting handbooks for both green bonds and social bonds on our website, and there is also further guidance like the climate transition finance guidance and so on that I mentioned. Lastly, I'd like to invite you to register for our final event in the LATAM series, which is going to be on Chile and the wider Andean sustainable debt market. And that will be on the 7th of December. You can already go to our website, the ICMA website that is, and register for that. With that, again, thank you for tuning in today. And thank you again to Banobras for the keynote. And thank you for the panelists as well. Thanks, everyone.